The continuum of leadership behavior was introduced by Robert Tannenbaum and Warren H. Schmidt in 1958 in the article How to Choose a Leadership Pattern in Harvard Business Review. The Tannenbaum and Schmidt Continuum is a simple model of leadership theory which shows the relationship between the level of freedom that a manager chooses to give to a team and the level of authority used by the manager. The model addresses the problem of how modern managers can be democratic in their relationships with subordinates and at the same time maintain the necessary authority and control in the organizations for which they are responsible. The Tannenbaum and Schmidt Continuum of leadership behavior is often shown as a simple graph. We will now take a look at the structure of the model. The model goes from boss-centric leadership, where it is all about use of authority by the manager, to subordinate-centered leadership, where the freedom for subordinates takes up most of the area, sometimes also called employees or non-managers. The Tannenbaum and Schmidt Continuum can be related to McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. Boss-centered leadership is similar to Theory X, and subordinate-centered leadership relates more to Theory Y. Tannenbaum and Schmidt identified a continuum of 7 distinct leadership styles. Each type of style is related to the degree of authority used by the boss and to the amount of freedom available to subordinates in reaching decisions. By understanding this continuum, you can see some of the options available to you, and these help you think about which leadership style is most appropriate in a given situation. We shall now review each style individually. The manager makes the decision and announces it. In this case, the boss identifies a problem, considers alternative solutions, chooses one of them, and then announces this decision to the subordinates for implementation. None of the employees are consulted. It is an order. The manager sells the decision. The manager takes responsibility for identifying the problem and arriving at a decision. But rather than simply announcing it, the manager takes the additional step of persuading the subordinates to accept it. The manager seeks to reduce resistance from the employees by telling them what's in it for you. The manager presents ideas and invites questions. The employees can then better understand what the manager is trying to accomplish. This give and take also enables the manager and the employees to explore more fully the implications of the decision. This may sometimes affect the manager's ideas, but the employees have very little influence on the final decision. The manager presents a tentative decision subject to change. Before finalizing it, the manager presents the proposed solution for the reaction of those who will be affected by it. The manager says, "I'd like to hear what you have to say about this plan that I've developed. I'll appreciate your frank reactions, but will reserve for myself the final decision." You could say he consults his employees. This kind of behavior permits the employees to exert some influence on the decision. The manager presents the problem, gets suggestions, and then makes the decision. Up to this point, the boss has come before the group with a solution of his or her own. Not so in this case. The subordinates now get the first chance to suggest solutions. The manager's initial role involves identifying the problem. He or she might, for example, say something of this sort. We are faced with a number of complaints from newspapers and the general public concerning our service policy. What is wrong here? What ideas do you have for getting to grips with this problem? The purpose is to capitalize on the knowledge and experience of those who are on the firing line. From the expanded list of alternatives developed by the manager and the subordinates, the manager then selects the solution that he or she regards as most promising. The manager defines the limits and asks the group to make a decision. At this point, the manager delegates to the group the right to make decisions. Before doing so, however, he or she defines the problem to be solved and the boundaries within which the decision must be made. An example might be the handling of a parking problem at a plant. The boss decides that this is something that should be worked on by the people involved. The boss tells the people, "There is the open field just north of the plant which has been designated for additional employee parking. We can build underground or surface multi-level facilities as long as the cost does not exceed $1 million. Within these limits, we are free to work out whatever solution makes sense to us. After we decide on a specific plan, the company will spend the available money in whatever way we indicate. The decision is a joint effort within the boundaries defined by the manager. The manager permits the group to make decisions within prescribed limits. The manager abdicates the decision power to the group. This represents an extreme degree of group freedom, only occasionally encountered in formal organizations, as for instance in many research groups. Now let us turn from the types of leadership which are possible in a company situation to the question of what types are practical and desirable. 3 factors are of particular importance when a manager considers how to manage. These are forces in him or herself as the manager, forces in the subordinates, and forces in the situation. The strength of each of these 3 factors will, of course, vary from instance to instance, but managers who are sensitive to them can better assess the problems that face them and determine which mode of leadership behavior is most appropriate for them. We shall now review each of the 3 factors. The manager's behavior in any given instance will be influenced greatly by the many forces operating within his or her personality. Among the important internal forces affecting managers is their value system. If a manager feels that individuals should have a share in making decisions which affect them, the manager moves towards subordinate-centered leadership. But if the manager is convinced that the official who is paid to assume responsibility should personally carry the burden of decision-making, then he or she moves towards boss-centered leadership. Managers' confidence in subordinates affects their leadership style. Managers differ greatly in the amount of trust they have in other people generally, and this carries over to the particular employees they supervise at a given time. The manager moves towards subordinate-centered leadership when he trusts his employees, and towards boss-centered leadership if he doesn't. The manager's own leadership inclination affects the leadership style. There are some managers who function more comfortably and naturally as highly directive leaders. They move towards the boss-centered leadership style. Other managers seem to operate more comfortably in a team role, where they are continually sharing many of their functions with their subordinates. They move towards subordinate-centered leadership. the manager's feelings of security in an uncertain situation. Managers who release control over the decision-making process thereby reduce the predictability of the outcome. Some managers have a greater need than others for predictability and stability in their environment. These managers move towards boss-centered leadership. Those managers who don't need the same predictability and stability move towards subordinate-centered leadership. Managers bring these and other highly personal variables to each situation they face. If they can see them as forces which influence their behavior, they can better understand what makes them prefer to act in a given way. And, understanding this, they can often make themselves more effective. Before deciding how to lead a certain group, managers will also want to consider a number of forces affecting their subordinates' behavior. They will want to remember that each employee, like themselves, is influenced by many personality variables. In addition, each subordinate has a set of expectations about how the boss should act in relation to him or her. The better managers understand these factors, the more accurately they can determine what kind of behavior on their part will enable subordinates to act most effectively. Generally speaking, managers can permit subordinates greater freedom if the following essential conditions exist. If the subordinates have relatively high needs for independence. If the subordinates have a readiness to assume responsibility for decision-making. Some see additional responsibility as a tribute to their ability. Others see it as passing the buck. If they have a relatively high tolerance for ambiguity. Some employees prefer to have clear-cut directives given to them. Others prefer a wider area of freedom. If they are interested in the problem and feel that it is important. If they understand and identify with the goals of the organization. If they have the necessary knowledge and experience to deal with the problem. If they have learned to expect to share in decision-making. Those who have come to expect strong leadership and are then suddenly confronted with a request to share more fully in decision-making are often upset by this new experience. On the other hand, employees who have enjoyed a considerable amount of freedom resent bosses who begin to make all the decisions themselves. Managers will probably tend to make fuller use of their own authority if the above conditions do not exist. At times, there may be no realistic alternative to running a one-man show. We end up in the field use of authority by the manager. In addition to the forces which exist in managers themselves and in the subordinates, certain characteristics of the general situation will also affect the manager's behavior. We will now review the more critical environmental pressures that surround them. Like individuals, organizations have values and traditions which inevitably influence the behavior of the people who work in them. Managers who are newcomers to a company quickly discover that certain kinds of behavior are approved of while others are not. They also discover that to deviate radically from what is generally accepted is likely to create problems for themselves. Before turning decision-making responsibility over to a subordinate group, the boss should consider how effectively its members work together as a unit. One of the relevant factors here is the experience the group has had in working together. It can generally be expected that a group which has functioned for some time will have developed habits of cooperation and thus be able to tackle a problem more effectively than a new group. The degree of confidence that the members have in their ability to solve problems as a group is also a key consideration of the problem may determine what degree of authority should be delegated by managers to their subordinates. Obviously, managers will ask themselves whether subordinates have the kind of knowledge which is needed. It is possible to do them a real disservice by assigning a problem to them that their experience does not equip them to handle. The pressure of time. This is perhaps the most clearly felt pressure on managers. The more that they feel the need for an immediate decision, the more difficult it is to involve other people. In organizations which are in a constant state of crisis, one is likely to find managers personally using a high degree of authority with relatively little delegation to subordinates. When the time pressure is less intense, however, it becomes much more possible to bring subordinates in on the decision-making process. Forces in the manager, in the subordinates, and in the situation are the principal forces that impinge on managers in any given instance, and that tend to determine their tactical behavior in relation to subordinates. In each case, their behavior ideally will be that which makes possible the most effective attainment of their immediate goals within the limits facing them. As managers work with their organizations on the problems that come up day to day, their choice of leadership pattern is usually limited. But as they look ahead months or even years, they can shift their thinking from tactics to large-scale strategy. Managers are now faced with a challenging question. At which point along the continuum should they act? The answer depends on what they want to accomplish. Let us suppose that they are interested in the same objectives that most modern managers seek to attain. They want to raise the level of employee motivation, to increase the readiness of subordinates to accept change, to improve the quality of all managerial decisions, to develop teamwork and morale, and to further the individual development of employees. Most research and much experience of recent years give a strong factual basis to the theory that a fairly high degree of subordinate-centered behavior is associated with the accomplishment of the goals that modern managers seek to attain. You, as a modern manager, must therefore strive to give employees freedom with responsibility, but within the limits specified in the model. Let us now take a look at a criticism of the model. The model does not discuss how the different leadership styles are perceived by employees. Leadership styles 6 and 7 can be perceived as laissez-faire from the employee's point of view. Cultural differences between employees from different backgrounds or countries and their perception of leadership are not discussed in the model. How is it perceived when you call the member of staff, employees, subordinates, or even non-managers is not discussed in the model. It is anticipated that the manager can switch between all 7 types of leadership styles. This is an unrealistic assumption. By understanding the different aspects of the model, the manager can get a better understanding of his or her choice among different leadership styles in different situations and can thereby make themselves more effective.